Okay, we're back. This is probably like the 13th episode or course. 14th, 15th, 14th, 14th, 16th. The 14th. We've been doing this for 14 weeks. So I missed a week, but someone stood in for me. So we've been doing this for 14 weeks. It's an important topic, and I wanted to begin tonight talking about something that I think is important for this discussion. And first I wanted to welcome all of you who are coming, and we've just turned off the AC. And what else is in the background making noise? Something. Okay. Some fans are blowing. So, as many of you know, I have taught a course in sexual purity for men. In preparing for that course, I decided I would listen to some lectures given by Christians on the subject of sexual purity, on the subject of continence, chastity, and celibacy. And so in listening to those lectures, and also having heard other lectures given by pastors, what became clear is that in Christian understanding, they believe very strongly in celibacy before marriage and sex contained only within marriage, and amongst the Catholics only within marriage for children. But where they differ in the way we understand the utility of sex, as Krishna says, Kamo Shmi Bharatashaba, I am sex, how they understand it differently, is they believe that it is one of the pleasures that God has given us for which we should enjoy within the family unit, but not only enjoy it, but enjoy it or fully exploit it. Enjoy it to the fullest, because it's a pleasure that God has given us, and therefore, logically, He wants us to enjoy it. So within the family, they don't really stress restriction, they stress enjoyment. Before married life, they stress very strongly, they stress restriction, celibacy, and that the sexual act is only meant for one's spouse. Now, we differ from that, and I'll explain a few ways in which we differ, and explain one of the problems I see, or the problem I see in how they've come to this conclusion, which can be a problem for us if we're not careful. God wants us to be happy. We all know that. And Prabhupada has often said, when he was asked what the goal of life is, sometimes he would say the goal of life is to be happy, and then he would clarify that by saying, but the problem is we're not happy. In fact, in our attempts to be happy, we're quite unhappy, or we're quite miserable. So he didn't deny the idea that God wants us to be happy. And then there's this story in the Bhagavatam. I believe it was Prahlad Maharaj. He was traveling and he saw a sadhu. And the sadhu was living on the side of the road. And he said, Sadhuji, you're living on the side of the road. It appears that you're doing all right. You're getting food and you're maintaining your health. But how is it that you decided to renounce the world and just live like this? And he said, well, I observed that every time people wanted, or in their efforts, people's efforts to become happy, what would normally happen is they would get the opposite result. They would come together for unity, but they'd become more disunited. Or they'd come together for happiness and they'd become more unhappy. So Prahlad Maharaj, he made a very powerful statement, and he said that it's not difficult to become happy. So the difficulty in becoming happy starts when you try to become happy, because in your effort to become happy, you become miserable. The more you try to become happy, the more unhappy you become. So the problem is your effort to become happy. If you didn't make the effort, you would be happy. You'd be okay. You'd be much happier if you didn't make the effort. Or sometimes we say the cure is worse than the disease. So the effort you make to cure the disease of unhappiness causes you more unhappiness. So that was his formula. So that was a point that Prabhupada had made. He said, yes, okay, God wants us to be happy, but the problem is, in your effort to be happy, you're not becoming happy, but on the contrary, you're suffering, or misery or distress arises as a result of that effort. So now we go back to the idea of celibacy before marriage. Within marriage, God wants us to be happy. The logical conclusion is, therefore, we should enjoy with our spouse unrestrictedly, because that's a pleasure God has given us. So there's a fallacy in that logic, because if you apply that logic to other aspects of life, then you could say any aspect of life in which there is pleasure, and you can in some way validate that pleasure as not being impious or sinful, then the conclusion would be God wants you to enjoy that, whatever that may be. Like we could think eating is a pleasure which God wants us to enjoy. So then you might say, well, if that's true, then pizza, ice cream, and cake will be my diet because God wants me to enjoy, and that's what I should eat. And of course, you know, if you do that, there'll be consequences. Now, many people don't understand the consequences of unrestricted sex. They understand it in terms of venereal disease, but there are other consequences which are in Ayurvedic literature and other yogic shastras, which talk about the power that a man builds up by retaining semen. So when the Christians say just enjoy unrestrictedly, it's not within a context of understanding the importance of retaining semen or the importance in general of discipline in this area. Of course, Christians believe in self-discipline in many areas of their life, but they don't really believe that self-discipline is necessary or very necessary if you're married. And this is an area in which we strongly disagree. It is not our logical conclusion that everything is enjoyable is a gift from God to enjoy. It's not necessarily true. On the contrary, many things which are enjoyable become sources of entanglement for the very reason that they are enjoyable. In fact, Srila Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita that the feeling of pleasure one gets through material enjoyment actually becomes the person's enemy, because it becomes the cause of more or extended material attachment, or more deeply rooted material attachment. So just because something is pleasurable, it doesn't mean that it's a gift from God. In fact, it often means, in a sense, that it's a curse, because that pleasure keeps us entangled. It keeps us attached to enjoying that thing. Patanjali, the author of the Yoga Sutras, said that attachment, or we become attached to something from which we had a past pleasurable experience. So if we remember pleasure from an experience in the past, it creates a future attachment. So now I'm attached to something because I remember in the past that I enjoyed it. So in this way, sexual pleasure, we remember the pleasure of it, we become attached to it, we want to continually enjoy it. And all the yogic scriptures, the Ayurvedic scriptures, Gita, they all talk about discipline, particularly disciplining oneself sexually. And through sexual discipline, one increases their power, their mental power and their physical power, so they can use that energy that was going into sexual activity, they can use it for something better, something higher. So some people find this difficult to understand. Well, God made it so pleasurable. If He didn't want you to just enjoy it as you like, at least with your wife or your husband, why did He make it so pleasurable? But you could levy that argument for anything, and particularly for things which are not good, like I said, eating foods which are very delicious but aren't healthy. You could levy that same argument. Well, why did God make chocolate cake so delicious if it's not good for me? Why did He make foods fried in oil with all kinds of sauces made from oil? Why did He make them so delicious if we're finding that fried foods are not healthy? Actually, you're finding that if you fry things in oil other than ghee, the oil becomes carcinogenic. And refined foods and refined sugars and flours, and it's so delicious, and it must be that God wants me to enjoy. And then we find out years later that so many diseases were caused by improper diet. So it's not logical that everything that's enjoyable is necessarily a gift from God. It can be a curse physically, or it can be a curse in the sense that we become attached to something, or we become addicted to enjoying it in a way we can't give it up. So I went on the internet and I wanted to read something. I got the yamas and niyamas from Patanjali because I thought it would be interesting to read. As many of you know, yama means what to do and niyama means what not to do. So Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, was presenting a form of yoga which was primarily meditation and mind control, and how to fix the mind so one could reach samadhi. So he, in order to reach a samadhi, he recommended certain practices outside of meditation. So I'll read those, and these are the yamas and niyamas. Number 1, ahimsa, non-violence, which, as we know, means not to harm others, but not also to harm animals, which means not eating them. Satya, truthfulness, not deceiving others in our thoughts, not pretending to be who we're not, and being honest in our actions. Asetya, not stealing. So this is, just basically a life of integrity and honesty. And then comes brahmacharya, sexual responsibility. So this is interesting. In Christianity, they're telling us that when you're married, you should enjoy sex as much as you want because it's God's gift. It's one of God's greatest gifts because it's one of the greatest pleasures. Or sometimes they'll actually say it's God's greatest gift because it's His greatest pleasure. And I've heard several pastors in front of their congregations even describe how much they enjoy sex with their wives. And when I heard that, it was very disturbing to me to hear that they've misunderstood this to such an extent that they want to justify any kind of inability to control themselves, to restrict themselves, in the name of God giving us this pleasure. So here, it's interesting, if you want to practice yoga, then Patanjali said, practice brahmacharya. And that also, practice of brahmacharya also means respecting other living entities, not seeing them as objects for one's sense gratification. Then he goes on to aparigraha, abstention from greed. So, these are connected. Not coveting things that others have, unnecessary acquisition. So it's all within the line of self-control, self-discipline, austerity. And now, sexual control is a great austerity, obviously. And then Prabhupada said austerity is necessary for making spiritual advancement. Now, the niyamas, cleanliness, austerity, surrender of the self to God, to swadhyaya, self-study, spiritual self-education, contemplation. So I want to talk a little bit about austerity because I read something very interesting that Prabhupada wrote. And most of us don't like austerity. And Prabhupada said austerity, the actual definition is voluntary physical suffering or any kind of suffering. Voluntary suffering for the sake of spiritual advancement. So if you ask anybody, would you like to do some austerity? Generally, they will say no. Coming up, I don't know when, it's coming up this month or maybe in early June, there's going to be the Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi. So Nirjal means no water. So on Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi, if you fast completely and don't take any water, it is said if you've missed any Ekadasis, then you make up for the missing of Ekadasis by following this Ekadasi. So then now I'm telling you about Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi. So many of you are probably thinking, that doesn't sound like fun. I'd rather not spend a day without food and drink. So generally we don't embrace austerity, but austerity is a necessary part of spiritual practice. So sexual control is an austerity of the body. Now the interesting thing about austerity that Srila Prabhupada said is that Krishna will impose difficulty in the life of a devotee, and then Prabhupada said because austerity is necessary to make spiritual advancement. Isn't that interesting? that austerity is actually necessary, and it's so necessary that Krishna may, if needed, impose obstacles or difficulties in one's life or create austerities for one in their life or in our life, because we need austerity to advance in Krishna consciousness. So the idea being that a sensual life and spiritual advancement are really at odds. And therefore, any kind of sense gratification that is needed or required is always meant to be regulation. Regulate it. Don't just do it whenever you feel like it. But even if you're going to do it, if you regulate it, there's some restraint, there's some control, and then you gradually become detached from it. Whereas if you do it unrestrictedly, you become more and more attached. And one of the ways you become attached, as we said, is because it creates the experience of pleasure, creates a memory of that pleasure, so now you want to do that again. Also, the way it's explained is that every time we engage in any activity of material enjoyment or even a sinful activity, the seed to perform that activity is sprouted by the activity itself. And you probably all experienced this. Just like they have this commercial, well, at least they had this commercial when I was young. They had these crackers. So these crackers, I don't know if you ever had these crackers that are salty, but they have sugar in them and just the right amount of spice. So the combination, they're not sweet crackers or salty crackers, but they have a little sugar. So the combination of a little bit of sugar, the salt, and the spice, it makes it impossible just to eat one. When you eat one, it stimulates your appetite, so you want to eat another one. So they had this commercial for these crackers, I forget the name of them. And in the commercial, their punchline was, "Bet you can't eat one," meaning it's impossible to eat one, because once you eat one, you're going to have to eat another one. Have any of you experienced that? Eating some cracker or chip or something, or candy or something, you can never just eat one because it's so good. So sense gratification and many forms of sinful activity are like that. You can't, it's not like a lot of times we think, I'll do it and get it out of my system, which may be true in some cases, but if it's not done carefully in a regulated way, you don't get it out of your system, you put it more into your system. So therefore, in the Yoga Sutras, in the Ayurveda, in Bhagavad Gita, in Sanskrit literatures, there's this whole idea, if you can renounce, and if you can't renounce, regulate. Because by regulation, detachment will come. But there's never the concept of unrestricted sense enjoyment. And then Prabhupada would talk about unrestricted sense enjoyment as animal life. But in a sense, you often see animals are more regulated because they mate by seasons, and human beings are more unregulated in many ways. So I just thought that looking at the Christian, of course all Christians believe this, but this is what you'll generally find in mainstream or fundamental Christianity, the logic that something is enjoyable, therefore God wants you to enjoy it, but He doesn't want you to enjoy it outside of marriage because it's irresponsible. He only wants you to enjoy it responsibly. So there is truth to that. But they extend it to this logic which is not logical at all. And part of the reason I believe, or the problem that I see, is that when you don't have a disciplic succession, then you don't have this checks and balances. So anyone can use their mundane logic and come up with so many conclusions that are not in line with really with what Jesus taught, or in line with other traditions. But there's no checks and balances. It's an individual utilizing their own logic, and their own logic, which tends to be geared towards material enjoyment, kicks in, and then therefore they come up with this conclusion. So we should not fall into that trap of thinking just because it's enjoyable, Krishna wants us to enjoy it unrestrictedly. Now, naturally, the question comes up, but we have natural urges. So Prabhupada said, yes, okay, you have natural urges. You have to eat, so you eat Krishna prasadam. You have to mate, so you have children in Krishna consciousness. But Prabhupada's idea was not that we enjoy unrestrictedly and we enjoy till the end of our life. That when our sexual tendencies begin to decline, that is nature's sign saying, okay, It's time to wind down. It's time to move on to the next stage of life where you can be more renounced. And so you can see there's a system there. Okay, when you're younger, you raise a family, you have children, but you do it in a regulated way, and as you become older, the body naturally begins to wind down. It's not as passionate. It becomes more easy to become detached. Now, what we see going on in our culture is something where people are resisting that, where they feel that it's a kind of curse, that now I'm getting older and I'm not so sexually active, so I'll take, I don't want to call it medication, because it's not really medication. It's not curing a disease. But I'll take, for the lack of a better word, medication to stimulate my sexual desire, which is tending to wane due to my body being older or just not being healthy, or both. And so for us as devotees, we see it as a natural process that God is saying, okay, your child rearing years are over. Now let's become more detached. And you can see naturally when people are older, what do they want to do? They want to give things away. They have too many things. They want to live more simply. So it's a natural progress. So I thought these yamas and niyamas were interesting to discuss, especially the idea of self-control, brahmachari, tapasya, austerity. So austerity, it's really important for us to understand how important, it's very important to understand how important austerity is for us. Austerity it's a necessity for spiritual advancement. Prabhupada says in the second canto of the Bhagavatam, an easygoing life and spiritual advancement, they don't go well together. And you see so much of what happens in the name of spirituality in Kali Yuga is they put them together. If you are spiritually advanced, then consequences will be material happiness will come to you, because that's God's gift to you. And for us as devotees, we say, no, God's gift is to create austerity for us, because in that way we become detached. If God's giving us all these gifts and we become attached to them, then what happens? We become so attached, we can't perfectly become Krishna conscious. We become attached to the material world. We become attached to taking another birth. It's that they don't have that understanding, and it's so obvious in their theology or their philosophy that understanding is not there. That what's important to them here is the amount of enjoyment you can get within a religious framework, within a belief in God, within a belief in God's grace, equaling material enjoyment. So we don't see Krishna's grace in terms of material enjoyment. We don't see it that way. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur once said, for a devotee's path will be filled with thorns. But those difficulties are all ways of Krishna showing mercy to make a devotee more detached and to make a devotee stronger. So when Krishna's really kind, then it said, Harishe taddanam chana, he's really kind, he takes away anything which is an obstacle for you. And so often it's those very obstacles we want to hold on to because we're attached to them and we don't think we can live without them. So our process is somehow either now or later, sooner or later, to become detached. And if we can't perfectly control ourselves sexually, then the idea is regulation. Regulate it, control it. Don't just do it whenever you want, whenever you feel like it. Then Prabhupada said that's animal life, and we have to raise ourselves above that attachment. And as I was saying before, the energy, there's so much energy, physical, emotional energy that is involved in the sexual act. And so much energy can be redirected when we control that. It's like if you have something to do and you're diverted by something that you really like. And you keep getting diverted from important work because you always end up going out playing video games or whatever it is that you like, and you procrastinate on what you really need to do. So you can see sex in a similar way in the sense how it deviates the mind and deviates energy from the mind away from things which are important spiritually. So that way it's important to control. And Now a lot of devotees say, but I'm young and it's difficult to control. And Prabhupada, in his books, talks about how difficult it is to control. And he acknowledges that it is difficult to control. And one of the things he acknowledges that basically you can't control it without Krishna consciousness, without a high level, a strong level of Krishna consciousness. You'll find it virtually impossible to control. So he's acknowledging the power. He never minimizes the power. Ever. It's never like Prabhupada is just saying it's not a big thing. He's saying, no, it is a big thing. But on the other hand, he's saying, if you're Krishna conscious, it's not such a big thing to overcome. It's only when we're not Krishna conscious that it's a big thing to overcome. So that's the idea. So we are yogis. We're practicing a yoga system, bhakti yoga or karma yoga. And in any yoga system, brahmachari, sexual restraint, is essential. Now, does anybody have it? I'm going to read your comments here. We have a comment from the Kremlin. Hello, Kremlin. So Kremlin says the Jewish and Islamic concept of sex is the same as Christian. Yeah. It's really, if you want to motivate people, if you want to motivate young boys to be religious, just offer them 72 virgins in heaven. What more motivation could you give a 16-year-old boy than that? What more could they want? So, in Krishna consciousness, Krishna doesn't dangle carrots in front of us. My premise is that nobody really wants to go to the spiritual world, because in the spiritual world there is no sense gratification. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. And people think they want to go there, but they're attached to enjoying themselves in this world. And they think wrongly that the spiritual world must be an increase in sense enjoyment. Lord Buddha nicely said that enlightenment is everything you think it isn't. And that was one of my big realizations when I became a devotee. This is exactly nothing like I thought it would be, because we tend to think of a higher stage of consciousness as a higher form of sense gratification. But it has nothing to do with sense gratification. So, logical conclusions we're meant to enjoy, so heaven should be a greater form of enjoyment. God will give us more enjoyment. And so, if we enter the world of tapasya and self-discipline with this consciousness, we could never master it, because then there's never an adjustment where God becomes the center of enjoyment instead of us. They'd never make that switch. That's always God. God's duty is to supply us with enjoyment. That's His function. That's why He exists. So that again puts us in the center. That He works for us. He works. Now we say God's desire out of love for us is for us to be happy. But happiness and sense enjoyment don't equate. Now we know that. So it's very interesting that any religious tradition could create any kind of sensual pleasure with happiness, what to speak of spiritual happiness, when the basic foundations of spiritual life is that material happiness or material pleasure does not equal real happiness. So it's important for us. Okay. Dr. Greg, you've made it. Yes, and Kremlin is saying sexual addiction is every bit as intense as drug addiction. Yeah, maybe more so, because it's such a strong physical need. Now, last week we were reading some of the things that Prabhupada said about sex, and the reason we were reading these is we wanted to define we wanted to clarify his definition of illicit sex, what he meant by that, and so we know where we're going in our life with where we are at in terms of Prabhupada's definition, and how we want to relate to that, and how in relating to it, where we want to be, and how we can act to get to where we want to be in terms of our level of sexual purity. And another important thing we find out from reading what Prabhupada said about this is why we should want to raise ourselves. Because if you don't have a reason, how can you do it? Or why would you want to do it? And if you don't, the why, what do they say? If the why is not strong enough, the how will not be strong enough. So we need a strong why. Why do we want to be sexually pure? What's the reason? What are the ramifications? Because if the whys aren't strong, then we won't think of the hows. And if the whys are strong, the hows become more clear to us. Krishna reveals them to us. So let's continue reading. Hare Krishna. Manjesh is with us. We're missing Bhakti and Carol. She must be on vacation somewhere. And Studio Hare Krishna. Manjesh is always with us. Karuna Shakti, welcome. And any of you else of you who would like to come, you just under my picture, you can click chat and you can take part. Okay, here's a morning walk. Innocent child women, they're innocent. They should be given full protection. There's no such thing. They're being exploited, keeping themselves unmarried. And the hotels, the clubs, and what is it called? Topless. Yes, Prabhupada, topless, bottomless, this is going on. It is a regular policy that girls may remain unmarried, and the drunkards and the meat eaters may take advantage of the prostitution. This is the policy. They have no sympathy. So many hundreds and thousands of... Let me see if I'm on the right page. So many hundreds and thousands of... Yes. So many hundreds and thousands of innocent girls. They're like children, and they're exposed to prostitution. They have no shelter. Now these girls who are with us, they're feeling some shelter. So, here Prabhupada's, we've talked a lot about this idea of protection of women, and here Prabhupada's giving another example and saying that really in a society, in a Krishna conscious society, a civilized society, then this topless, bottomless exploitation of women would never be allowed, because women are always protected. Elderly are always protected. Cows are protected. Brahmins are protected. Children are protected, and women are protected. This is Vedic standard of life. So then women become prostituted. What kind of protection is that? In society that would allow that. A woman is like your mother. You don't allow your mother to do this. So, we've discussed this in the past, how the men, they very much want this because it gives them an opportunity. In the name of women's liberation or freedom of women, gives them the opportunity to exploit the women. So, any civilized man should be upset about this, concerned about this. Prabhupada, this is a conversation, May 21st, 1975. Prabhupada, and if you want to eat meat, let it die. That is our program. In other words, let the animal die naturally. If you like, you can accept. Thank you very much. The guest leaves. Then Prabhupada goes on speaking with the devotees that are in the room. This is the disease. They want to keep the poor girls free for prostitution so that they can enjoy. This is the main point. He has admitted, keep the young girls free. They have also sex desire, and this man will enjoy. This is the whole basic principle here in the West. Devotee, this man, he was of a very ripe age, and still he was saying that. Prabhupada, this man is, I guess the man was in some way appreciating or glorifying the fact that he could enjoy young women, and that there were many young women to enjoy. Willingly they would enjoy. So Prabhupada is talking about this, and so the devotee is saying, this man is a very, very old man. Prabhupada is saying, yes, the ripe age, up to the point of death, one is sexually inclined. A very, very heavy statement. Very, very heavy to ponder this. Because what it means is that the desire is so strong that we should never think that naturally it may decrease in its intensity, but at least subtly it's not just going to naturally go away. We actually have to deal with it. We have to uproot it. We have to work on it. We have to be controlled, restrained. It's very, very heavy. If you actually meditate on this, it's so heavy. You imagine dying with this desire in your heart, a strong desire to enjoy the opposite sex still in your heart. It's very, very heavy. So Prabhupada's warning, he's saying, yes, if you're not Krishna conscious, that even at a very ripe age, that desire will still be in your heart. Yes, the ripe age, up to the point of death, one is sexually inclined. Up to the point of death. So we would think, well, if I'm on my deathbed, then I'll become detached. But what's the guarantee? What's the guarantee we'll become detached from something that we've been attached to our entire life? So the Christians say, just enjoy. God made it for you to enjoy. And we say, whatever you're attached to at the time of death, that's where you'll go. That's what you'll become. And the Christians say, no, you've been saved. You've got a clean slate. It doesn't matter what you're thinking. And Patanjali, his whole Yoga Sutras are about controlling the mind, because the mind is the cause of future birth. Christians have no understanding of this. So they say, clean slate, God wants you to enjoy according to His will and His desire. Be happy. Don't worry about these things. You're too weak, you're too fallen, you can't do anything. And Krishna consciousness, we teach, become detached. Control yourself, discipline yourself. By the grace of God, by the power of the holy name, you can do all these things. It's not just you wander in a forest blindly and whatever animal you run into, then tough luck. No. Everything is done deliberately, consciously. We all have control. Or potentially we have control. There was a minister. I've told you the story. At the point of death, he was looking to the young girl. There's a story that there was a minister on his deathbed, and then a friend came with his daughter, his young daughter. And so when they came in the room, the man immediately looked at the daughter. He was just attracted by the daughter. So Prabhupada's saying, even he's on his deathbed, he's still attracted. The point of death, he was looking to the young girl. That is natural. Unless one is trained up, that is natural. That is Maya's entrapping machine to keep the living entity within this material world. So here Prabhupada's making a wonderful point. It's natural unless one is trained up. So unless we discipline ourselves, then it's going to be natural. It's natural in an unnatural way. It's natural in the material world. Even up to the point of death. That one is not becoming detached. And you see this. It's so evident in Western culture, less evident in Indian culture. But particularly evident in Western culture, that when people retire, they think of retirement as just the ability to be able to do whatever they want when they want, without any anxiety, to play tennis, to play golf, to visit with their friends, to just have so much time. Just like now, how much time do we have to spend with our friends? We never have enough time because we're all so busy raising families, working to make money. And then finally you can retire and there's like so much time. You can have like parties every night. You can go out to dinner every night. You can play sports. You can play games all day. You can go to movies. Whatever you want to do. So in the Western culture, people don't think, okay, this is a great opportunity. Now I'm retired. I don't really need much anymore. I'm not working. Perfect opportunity to become detached. It doesn't become logical because in our culture, we're not trained to think that way. So Prabhupada's saying, unless we train ourselves that way, then naturally, even at the end of our life, we'll be attached to the beauty of the opposite sex. The world was created that way to keep us here. And that's how we're meant to stay here. That's very pathetic when you think about it. And so the point is, we're aware of this, and in that awareness we can do something. Or at least make the effort to do something. So Shrita Kirti says, sometimes the youth, when we offer them Krishna consciousness, they say, when I get older, I won't be so attached to this enjoyment, so then I can take it up. Prabhupada. They generally think so, But that is not possible. Shrutikirti, that is not the fact. Prabhupada, in Paris, very, very old men, 75 years, 80 years old, they're going to the nightclub, paying $50 entrance fee. Then they spend money for women, wine. In few hours they stay there and come back. They are all old men. It is a very difficult job, but still, by Krishna's grace, you are accepting this principle. He's saying, difficult job. Very difficult job for us to practice some kind of sexual purity, and difficult to convince others to do so, to do the same. This is a great mercy of Krishna. Otherwise, it is very, very difficult. One old man, I told you, the Marquis of Jetland, in London. So he proposed. One of my godbrothers went to him. This is one of the lords in England named Jetland. And so he went to, when some of Prabhupada's godbrothers were in London, he went to them and he said, "Can you make me a Brahmin?" He said, "Yeah. All you have to do is give up your meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling." And Lord Jetland said, "That's impossible. I can't do that." So Prabhupada would always say that, people say these are the vital necessities of life: eating, meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling. This is the very basis of our life. We can't give these things up. In the Western countries, this is life: to have illicit sex, meat eating, drinking, and gambling. There are organized clubs, brothels, hotels only for this. People are accepting this principle. Young boys like you, it is Krishna's mercy. Otherwise, it is impossible. So here Prabhupada is saying, it's Krishna's mercy. Only by Krishna's mercy can we do this. Otherwise, it's impossible. This is the way the material world is working. Just like when water is going down a drain and you see the water, right? It's turning like this. It's just, that's the way the world goes. It's all going down. What's it going down towards? The attraction between male and female. And Prabhupada's saying it's impossible to overcome that even up until the end of life, unless one's Krishna conscious. And so when we understand these things, we think, oh, okay, now I understand. This is really the cause of bondage, and I'm really meant to overcome it. So therefore, if I'm married, in married life, then I have to regulate it in a way that it doesn't become an addiction, and regulate it in a way that gradually I become detached, so I can devote my full energy, mind, body, everything, to Krishna, and not be diverted by this. But as soon as we're not careful, then we become easily diverted. So in Bhagavatam, Prabhupada describes many, many great devotees who fell down being attracted by very, very beautiful women. Sometimes they were attracted by women from other planets, and they could not control themselves. Many, many great yogis, many, many great sages, and they couldn't control themselves. That these are people who have practiced austerity, practiced self-control, practiced discipline for hundreds of years, and then at a certain point, they met a woman and became attracted. The woman was so beautiful, and therefore the desire to enjoy that woman was stimulated to such a degree that they were unable to control themselves. And then you read those descriptions. Prabhupada gives these descriptions in the Bhagavatam. You read them, and you think, oh my God, if they couldn't do it, why should I even try? What's the point? And then right after Prabhupada describes them, and how all these great sages, or many great sages, had fallen, being attracted by very beautiful women, then Prabhupada said, but it is possible for one who is Krishna conscious. He's saying we can do it, but the we can do it is qualified. What's the What's the qualifier? And Prabhupada's saying you have to be very self-controlled. You have to be regulated. You have to be disciplined. You have to be in sattva gun. You have to be a sadhaka. He said, otherwise, you can't do it. Our desires, which seem natural, are really desires which are being influenced by the modes of nature in which we contact. So if we're always contacting the modes of passion and ignorance, passionate and ignorant desires will be reflected in our heart and in our body. And if we're living a more sattvic life, a life more in goodness, then the desires that are born of passion and ignorance begin to subside. So it's not that we're necessarily bound and we have to feel hopeless or helpless or both. But if we're not living in the mode of goodness, then we will become bound by passion and ignorance. And then we will feel helpless. I can't control myself. That's what addiction is all about, isn't it? I can't control myself. I'm helpless. And that's why when people take a 12-step program, the first principle is you can't help yourself. You are helpless. And only God can help you. So we don't want to come to a point where we feel helpless on the physical level, but we can feel helpless in the sense that we know that we cannot control ourselves unless Krishna helps us. So that kind of helplessness is good. Not the helplessness where we don't make the effort. Okay. So, Kremlin says, when I was teaching in the Ukraine, I was propositioned by girls as young as 15. So that means they were propositioning you to get good grades. And so this is a good point. So now they know they have this body and they know they can prosper in many ways with this body. They can make money, they can attract men, they can use it and seduce their teachers and get good grades without trying. So, I mean, that's why girls need to be protected. They need to be protected from these things. But the problem is that men will take advantage of it because the girls are offering this and they're using this as a means to get ahead. It's a very unfortunate situation. Kremlin says many prostitutes there in Eastern Europe. Yeah, in a bad economy, it's a very good way to make money, and a good way to eventually ruin their lives. I mean, you imagine you have a daughter and she's alone with these men in some hotel. Anything can happen. It's just a horrible thought to think of these girls' fathers, what they might be thinking. Okay, I'm trying to find where we left off. Anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I'll continue reading or discussion. Every woman should see every man like her son, and every man should see every woman like her mother, at least in the sense of wanting to protect her, not wanting to take advantage of her. And so that's the problem. That men want to take advantage of women, and women are allowing this to happen. Whereas in a civilized culture, men will protect women. They will not take advantage of them. Their desire, instead of exploitation, will be to care for them, to take care of them, to protect them, to honor them, to respect them. So when men try to exploit women sexually, they're not honoring them or respecting them. They're denigrating them, they're exploiting them. Very difficult situation. Okay. So here, Prabhupada, I'm not sure where this is from, but welcome, Yash. Yash means one who is famous, right? Materialistic way of life is that I have got nice senses. Let me enjoy the senses to the fullest extent. That is materialistic way of life. Just like cats, dogs, and hogs. The hogs, whenever they are sexually inclined, they don't care for whether it is a mother or a sister, this or that. It is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Nahu deho bhajam niloke kastad kaman arhate vidbhujam ye. Vidbhujam, vid means stool, bhujam means eater. So the stool eaters, that means the pig, stool eater's sense gratification is not meant for humans. Stool eater means these hogs. The hog's sense gratification is not meant for this human form. restriction. In human life, there is marriage. Why? What is marriage and prostitution? Marriage system means restricting sex life. Marriage system does not mean that you get a wife. Without any payment, you go on unrestricted sex life. That's exactly what the Christians were preaching. So sometimes Prabhupada calls this, well, your wife becomes your prostitute. No, that is not marriage. Marriage means to restrict your sex life. He'll hunt for sex life here and there. No, you cannot do that. Here is your wife, and that is only for child. It is restriction. So, it's very interesting. In the Vedic paradigm, restriction is really fundamental to all ashrams and all varnas. At some level, everyone is meant to restrict. And it's through restriction that we become elevated. And so this whole idea that God wants us to enjoy unrestrictedly, it's just so interesting how that idea has evolved through a religious system. Now we could understand if someone is agnostic or atheist, you'd expect them to say that. Well, life is meant for enjoyment. Enjoy unrestrictedly, because after this body is finished, you're finished, so just go for it. Okay, that makes sense. At least from the material point of view, it makes sense. If that's your premise, that this is the only life, go for it, enjoy. But from a spiritual perspective, it makes no sense. So it's so paradoxical that many of the Christian teachings advocate this kind of sensual enjoyment in the name of it being God's grace. And Prabhupada's calling it prostitution with your wife. Let's read another one. The propensity of sense enjoyment is sex life, eating, meat, and drinking. This is the propensity. Material life, these are the propensities. Everyone has got natural instinct for sex life, for meat eating and for drinking. This is the natural instinct, but they are restrained. They are coordinated by Vedic injunctions. Yes, you'll have sex life, but get yourself married. So there are so many paraphernalia for marriage. The subject matter is sex. Everyone knows. In the Western countries, they say legalized prostitution. But actually, it is not prostitution. It is regulating their sex life. So the Vedas describe, yes, sex life you have, but in marriage. And then drinking. Yes, drinking you may. Worship Chandi, offer him liquor, that is all. In other words, there's a Vedic system if you want to drink alcohol or you want to eat meat, and you do certain sacrifices. And so it's a kind of a complex system, and there are reactions for doing it. And so the whole idea is to discourage these activities by making them difficult to perform, and also making you aware of the reactions, because within these ceremonies you chant mantras which indicate the reactions that you will suffer for the activities you're performing, which is a lot different than going to a store and just buying a bottle of liquor or buying some meat. So Prabhupada was always very against being able to do this easily, and he said, if you want to eat meat, then you should kill your own animal, and you should offer that animal. Excuse me. So there's a system, and so the whole point is the system is restricting you by making it difficult, by making you aware of the sin that you will incur by performing the activity. So Prabhupada said, no slaughterhouses. You want to eat meat, you kill the animal yourself. You offer that animal to Durga. You accept the consequences. So it's a lot different. So it's all meant to restrict it, make it difficult. Now someone told me cigarettes are $4 a pack. So what's the idea? Just make it difficult for people to afford to smoke. What if cigarettes were $100 a pack? I mean, how many people would smoke? So the more difficult you make sinful activities, the better. That's the whole Vedic idea. Similarly, eating meat. Yes, you can eat meat. Just worship Goddess Kali. Have a goat sacrifice. So many rules and regulations. Everything is regulated. But they have avoided this. These Vedic injunctions, they have avoided. Now they have open slaughterhouse, liquor house, prostitution. This is sinful. Actually, it's sinful. Either you do it this way or that way. But if you act according to the Vedic injunction, the sinful activities are restrained. The sinful activities are restrained so that gradually you come to the spiritual platform. This is the Vedic principle. So that's the whole point we've been talking about. So, Bhakti and Carol has finally returned from her long walk. And we welcome you right at the end of the show. So, we had a mouthful to say, but the essence was restriction, regulation. Regulate the senses, control them, gradually become detached. That's the, one of the yogic principles that Patanjali taught was detachment. It's a very important principle. We talked about austerity. Prabhupada talks about this so much that it's not that we should be uncomfortable, but he said the goal of life is not to spoil our energy just trying to become comfortable. To spoil our energy just trying to enjoy our senses, then it's a waste. But really, austerity is really the wealth. It's called the wealth of the Brahmins. It's because in austerity there's realization. And in realization is how we make spiritual advancement. If we don't have any realization of Krishna consciousness, then we don't make any advancement. So no austerity, no realization. Then no realization, no advancement. It's the realization, the enlightenment that we're getting in our daily practice of Krishna consciousness that propels us forward. If there's no realization, then the material world starts to come down on us and we don't see our way through it. It's a realization that enables us to see our way out of this forest of the material world. You get so much realization through sacrifice. And austerity also means doing something for the pleasure of Krishna that you may not want to do. So it's so powerful. So I suggest this week we all do some austerity. Do something. Just think of something you could do that would be a little out of your comfort zone. Would be a little difficult for you. And just do it and see how you feel. It'll make you more detached. And it'll bring you a certain kind of joy and power. And you'll realize that austerity is really your wealth. The real wealth that we have is not sense gratification, it's austerity. Rising early. Doing something. Rising early is difficult. Chanting our rounds is difficult. It's an austerity. Accepting devotional principles that are difficult for us. Spreading the message of Krishna consciousness. That's a great austerity. All these things help purify us. They're all important. And if we don't voluntarily accept the austerity, then Krishna will place obstacles in our way so that we involuntarily have to perform austerity. I think it's easier to do it voluntarily. I'm kind of afraid of Krishna making my life unnecessarily austere. So I prefer to accept the austerity voluntarily. It's kind of like I get to choose. Say, Krishna, I'll choose the austerity rather than you, if that's okay. And he says, okay, as long as you choose it, I won't have to choose it. So that's the idea. So thank you all. And oh yeah, Bhakti and Carol says sleeping on the floor. Yeah, if you can actually sleep, then it would be a foolish austerity if you wake up tired. So you don't want to do that either. Or for Purushottam Mass. Now Bhakti and Carol is saying she should sleep on the floor for Purushottam Mass. Yeah. I slept on the floor a few weeks ago. I didn't sleep well though. I used to sleep on the floor every day. But now in my old age it's more difficult. What can I say? Okay, so we'll see you all next week, and have a wonderful week, and do some austerity this week that you would normally do, and just note how you feel, and we can discuss that next week. Thank you. Hare Krishna.